Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another Gears of War Ascendance Cliff Notes, Spark Notes, highlight reel, whatever you'd like to call it. But for now, it's going to be part 2 of Act 3, and I'm going to give you a quick update. There was so much information in part 1 of Act 3 and so much to go through in part 2 when I was making this video. I'm going to break the second half of Act 3 up into 2 parts. One containing the first 4 chapters, the other part containing the second 4 plus the epilogue. So I'm going to break some of the information up so it's not such a strenuous video for viewers or myself to make. And for viewers, you don't have to sit there for a full almost hour listening to me ramble on, try to get all this information in. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and kick things off where we left off with Chapter 8. We're going to join back up with the squad now of JD, Del, Cole, Sam, and Baird flying towards South Village from Orzabal Crater in that King Raven that we knew they all got onto and left from there. Following behind 3 Condors as they would begin another assault, this time on South Village, though. The newly programmed DBs are going to be the main force of fighting, and they're going to end up searching for Marcus and Kate. While they're flying on this King Raven, they see the pods come out and land, and it actually is such a gratifying moment for JD and Del, because these newly programmed DBs aren't just getting slaughtered, and not just Baird, not just Sam, not just Cole, but JD and Del are really taking this in. The DR1s are flying out of their pods, getting to one knee with their tri-shots, sweeping the area to make sure that the Deadeyes can safely come up behind them and begin firing down range. And once they see that they're kind of taking out these juvies and some of the drones, the King Raven's going to float down the mountain face a little bit, and the Coltrane, in pure Coltrane fashion, makes the joke that he wishes he could be a part of the fight. You know, he doesn't want to go on a search and rescue mission just yet. He wants to be a part of that bad boy up there. And Sam begins to pull back on the King Raven flight stick, and they start to float up a little bit, and Cole says, it was only a joke. It was only a joke. He was only musing himself, because everybody knows Coltrane, he wants to be a part of the action. Coltrane ain't trying to take no time and no prisoners whatsoever. But as they float down, they're actually taunted a bit and interrupted in their search by the Snapjaws that we've heard so much about. They're kind of invading on their territory with the air pressure that's being put out by the King Raven's rotary blades. And some of them fly at Del, some of them fly through the cargo bay, basically, where they're all sitting. And it's one of those things where they kind of look around at why they're disturbing them so much, and there's a singular baby Snapjaw egg in one of these nests. And, you know, family's got to protect family, so you understand why they're attacking Del and the like, or trying to attack them. Nobody's been bitten, nobody's been, physically harmed yet. But they're going to start looking into the cave where Marcus was standing, where that DB picked up that picture of Marcus and that black skull cap that he so proudly wears and displays at all time. The forward party, the search party, will end up being JD and Cole. They're going to hop off the King Raven into the cave where Marcus, Kate, Oscar, Eli, and Mackenzie were, and begin searching. And they kind of come across the wreckage in that common room of the table that's split up, all the bodies strewn about, and then they move forward toward where the tunnels were. And once they get close enough to the tunnels, they actually find the destruction of Mackenzie's traps, those makeshift bombs that she had been creating the entire time. And they return after just a few minutes because they have all the information they need. The tunnels were actually sealed from inside, but there's no sign of life or them now at that point in the tunnels. Baird, he signals to Sam that they might be on the mountaintop. They might be further up the cliff, so he kind of gives her the, let's go up signal. He basically knocks against the cockpit door, spins up or points up, and she begins to pull up in the King Raven. And when they get to the top or the precipice of the cliff, they see now that the DBs are losing, and it is not because of a Swarmak, it's not because of snatchers or bad tactics at this point. A carrier has joined the fray, one of those massive four-armed slug beasts that, open their chest and spit out those little rockets that fly out at their enemies and create that kind of lava pool-esque, I don't even know what to call it, but a lava pool basically at the feet that burns at its enemies. And the carrier is pulling itself forward on those massive forearms, one after the next, and it's sweeping across the DR1s, across these DBs, and it's causing havoc. It's ripping through the tactics of these new DBs. And one of the things that gets lost in this is the fact that they're basically not bulletproof on the outside, but that thick hide is thick enough that when Coltrane gets on the chain gun of the King Raven and fires hundreds of rounds at this thing, all it does is serve to piss it off. All it does is make that carrier a little bit angrier. And so it's one of those moments where it's you've pissed off this massive being now. You're trying to save some of your robots to keep fighting off the littler swarm. And now this carrier, before they even have a chance to really figure out how to fight it or combat it better, it's deceptively quick. It's menacing its way toward the King Raven. And before Sam can kind of pull the flight stick away from the cliff to get away from it, it leaps. It smashes on these forearms and leaps at the King Raven, and before it can get away, it grabs on one of those massive hulking hands onto one of the landing gear for the King Raven, and the sheer weight of this thing actually begins to rip the King Raven out of the sky. It's not used to holding up all that extra weight, so Sam is trying her best to level this thing out. She's trying not to let the carrier pull it down into the caverns below, basically, where the river basin is and that waterfall is. And the carrier now reaches up with its opposite hand, the one that's not holding on to the landing gear, and grabs a hold of the seat where the Coltrane was. Coltrane eventually just kind of backpacks out of there. He just shoots himself off of the seat away from it. The carrier grabs the gun and the seat, and with one fell swoop just rips it out of the King Raven, just like it was just a piece of paper, basically shredding it clean from the chopper. And Del realizes something has to happen. The Snapjaws are still coming around because they've descended back to where those nests were. The carrier's ripping the King Raven piece by piece at this point, and he sees his opening. He grabs a tube that at the end of it has a grappling hook attached to it, one of those gas-powered grappling hooks that they'd use to kind of make zip lines for the King Raven for people to kind of zip off of it onto landing points. But it can also retract, and Del takes aim at the egg, the singular Snapjaw egg that's on that cliffside. And when he takes his shot, it is true. It hits the egg, and Del has to apologize a little bit because, he just killed a baby Snapjaw, and nobody wants to kill babies. That's just terrible. But nonetheless, he pulls the thing back toward him, and the carrier has no idea what it is. So the carrier, in his ignorance, grabs a hold of this egg and swallows it whole. And when the Snapjaws see this was all the evidence they needed to attack the carrier. All these Snapjaws begin biting and clawing and fanging at this carrier. And again, in the ignorance and the fact that it's just a monstrosity, it is a monster, it lets go with his other hand that was holding onto the King Raven and begins plummeting down toward the water, down these waterfalls. They won this fight. They need a little help from their friends, but that's okay because the Snapjaws, they had to lose something, but, Del and them didn't want to lose their lives, so I think it's a pretty even trade-off. But no rest for the weary, as the DBs that were being slaughtered up in the South Village by the carrier and the other swarm are now being thrown like pieces. The heads, the arms, the bodies, whatever, are being flung at the King Raven. One of them actually makes contact with the back rotor, and Sam knows that, they can't take another hit like this. They have to pull away from this cliffside before they take any more shots because they might just go down. And as she pulls away, she's actually going lower and further away from the cave, down toward where that river is. And the Coltrane spots something. It's a big sheet, basically. He's not sure what it is. It's dark in this moonlight. And then he sees those tendrils coming off of it, and he's not sure, but I'll be damned. That old man found a way out of another tight spot because he realizes it's a couple of parachutes. Those same parachutes that they used to escape the caves in the first place. And that is where Chapter 8 closes out, and we will pick right up with Chapter 9, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to join back up with Kate's group They're sitting on the shore where they had climbed up out of the water. And the only ones we see at first are Marcus, and he has each twin on either side of him, who seem to be resting, and Kate is coming back to where they have piled up on the shore now with a bunch of kindling, some sticks and some twigs. She kind of sets them on the ground and asks if anybody wants to help her make the bonfire or make the campfire that they're going to use. Marcus kind of asks, do you think that's a smart idea? People might see it. She says, well, we need something to cook our dinner and warm up a little bit. We've been in that cold water or that riverbank and then that lake. He begrudgingly kind of concedes this point to her. And Oscar at this point is out hunting for any kind of food. He's an outsider. He's a great scavenger. He's a great forager. He's a great hunter. So he's the natural choice to kind of go out on his own. The twins need to rest. They're still young. Marcus is a bit over the hill, so he's going to have to rest. Kate gathering up the kindling allowed for a easy thought process. Oscar's going to go hunt while she gathers up kindling. And all of a sudden, while she wants to start this fire and nobody's going to help her with it, basically none of the twins volunteered. Marcus didn't volunteer. Marcus has the idea to go check out the buildings and to get these kids to pipe back up, because Kate can see it, and certainly Marcus can see it, that the horror and the exhaustion of what their past 24, 48 hours has been is finally setting in on them, and it's a sad sight to see. But Marcus says, who wants to go with me to check out the buildings? Eli and Mackenzie, they pipe right up. They are ready and willing and able to help Marcus Phoenix go and search this empty building, or what they assume is an empty lumber mill at this point. And they kind of jump up, and they're going to match this gait, the way how quickly Marcus walks or kind of semi-jogs, that soldier's kind of gait. And Kate can't help but smile at it, because the kids went from having all this set in to a moment of reprieve, because she sees that they are taking such a liking to Marcus. They respond to him well. As gruff as he is, as rough as he is, as grizzled as a veteran as he is, these kids have taken quite a liking to him, and she can't help but smile at it. And she decides that while all this is going on, she's going to go and pick up some more kindling and, make the fire a little bit bigger, make it a little easier for them to create a bonfire atmosphere and cook whatever dinner, Oscar decides to bring back. She searches high and low. She gets to the edge of the shore, picks up any kindling she finds there. She goes close to the lumber mill so she can keep eyes on Marcus and the twins, excuse me. And then she goes to the edge of the forest and picks up even more kindling, to the point where she actually now has basically a bonfire to make. It's actually really cool to see how it comes about. And she looks over as she's creating this bonfire situation, and she sees that Marcus is basically playing special ops with the kids. She sees that they are entering the door very securely. They're doing things kind of by the book. And she smiles at it, because he's doing whatever he can to take their minds off of the horrors that they've seen, and it's working perfectly. She creates this bonfire. It's shooting up quite a few feet into the air. The flames are warm. She kicks the logs back a few feet to create some space and to make it a little more cozy. And she takes her amulet out again, as if looking at this amulet is going to give her something else, to some more evidence, a hint of what she needs to know about why her mother and grandmother had this amulet. And she's so distracted, as a matter of fact, that she doesn't hear Oscar coming up behind her. She doesn't hear him basically come back up with that rabbit and say, dinner is going to be served. And I think that says something about Kate, in the idea that that's how enthralled she is by this amulet, how desperate she is for any answer. She's lost herself several times where a lumbering kind of, not oaf, but lovable oaf, and Oscar can sneak up on her. Dinner's served. She tucks that necklace right back inside of her armor. Oscar's going to ask her where the twins are, because, he respects the hell out of Marcus, but to him, it's his responsibility to protect these twins. And when he asks where the twins are, she goes to say where they are, that they went to the lumber mill with Marcus, but her words change in her mouth. She just shouts, "Get down!" or "Down!" And Oscar instantly, he hits the dirt, he rolls to the right, and a spear, like a legitimate massive javelin, just flies right by where his head would. It would have just impaled the poor man. And off in the distance, she sees this form that has haunted her nightmares, that has consumed her for quite some time. She sees a speaker looking almost exactly like the one that took her mother way back in Fort Umsen so many moons ago. And he's flanked by 2 snatchers, whom he then commands off. That speaker commands those 2 snatchers off toward the lumberyard because they're going to be chasing Oscar. Kate turns, she looks at Oscar, she says, "Go get the kids, go get Marcus, let them know that they've made it here, that the swarm are here." And she goes off to or she's going to distract the speaker. The snatchers have gone off to the lumber mill, following Oscar in the distance. And she is on one side of the bonfire. The speaker is on the opposite. The flames are between them. He's this massive form. And she pulls the amulet out. And I don't at first know why. They don't give any hints to it. The reader kind of gets this impression that she's going to use it to taunt him with, which is exactly what she does. Like, I took this off the last corpse, the last speaker I killed. And the speaker responds with something that chills her to the absolute bone. I mean, it is one of the most chilling and powerful moments of this entire book. The speaker lays eyes on this amulet, lays eyes on the woman holding it, and says that it is a useless trinket from a useless human. And shortly after these words stun her, shock her to her core, he leaps over the bonfire at her, wielding another spear, and just is going to ram it down the skull and entire body of Kate Diaz. And she leaps out of the way. She rolls to the ground to the right of her. She lands, rolls up onto her hands and knees, just in time to see him try to yank the spear out of the log where she was sitting, up back into his grasp to fully have it under his control. And she actually kicks it right where the spear tip meets, the shaft, the handle of it, and it snaps it in twain. And when she snaps it, he just falls back because all that force he needed to pull that thing out of that stump doesn't give him any kind of trouble now. And it's almost like the old game where you'd be playing tug of war and then you just let go. He falls back into the fire, begins to burn, begins to char. Kate takes this chance to try to make a move toward her lancer that she sees. And as she tries to kind of get up and crawl her way, kind of monkey crawl, try as fast as she can to get to her lancer, she's caught right in the ribs with a massive blow. I mean, this thing hits her with the force of a Mack truck, hitting her to the ground. She turns to look back over her shoulder. She knows, had it not been for the armor of Anya Stroud that she now proudly wears, every single one of her ribs would have cracked under the weight of this blow, and nothing could have prepared her for what her eyes have now told her, what her eyes have given her vision to. She sees a second speaker looking almost identical to the first outside of the burns and the chars, wielding a massive club in his hands. Not a spear, but a club, and that must have certainly been the thing that damn near cracked her in twain. The first speaker looks to the second. He tells him to go get the others. The second looks for a second like he's going to argue, but hierarchy kind of takes over, and he goes to turn to walk away along with 2 more snatchers. So now 4 snatchers are headed for Marcus and the twins. The speaker is sending one of his own off to Marcus and the twins and Oscar. And she is stood face to face, looking at these 2 speakers on either side of this bonfire, staring at her as one of them is about to turn away. We close down chapter 9. We jump back in chapter 10 over to Oscar, who is now fleeing for his life. He's making a mad dash for the buildings. He slows his pace to try to keep the snatchers interested in him. He doesn't want them to go back to Kate, maybe for an easier prey, maybe for an easier kill. No, he wants them right here in this moment with him. And what he does also when he keeps looking back is he doesn't make sure he has sure footing. He trips, he falls, he reopens that wound where his arm had been broken. It's pain searing down now. It is almost unbearable, but he jumps back up to his feet. And as he jumps up and begins to zig and zag, he can hear a massive quill fly by him once and twice because both snatchers have tried to shoot one off at him, and he escapes narrowly both times. He comes up to the back loading dock of this lumber mill. He jumps up on the waist-high barrier. He sees a gate. He runs through it. As he gets onto the other side, he hears somebody tell him to duck and roll, and just in time, that duck and roll command from Marcus Phoenix was listened to perfection, because as he hit the ground, a wood saw blade flies just over him, almost giving him the haircut of a lifetime, but it saws the first snatcher completely in half, just like a biscuit, baby, and it falls to pieces. The second snatcher, though, was just behind it, had enough time to leap into the air, but when you leap in the air, it is harder for you to change directions, and so as you're coming down, they send off a second wood saw. Marcus and the twins have laid 2 traps for them, and both traps have been sprung perfectly because it hacks through 2 of the 4 legs of the snatcher, both left legs, and it will fall under the massive weight, not being able to hold itself up on these 2 brand new stumps it now has, wailing and screaming in agony. So Oscar, not out of mercy but out of rage, walks up to this snatcher, puts his gnasher to its face, points it a little bit up for the brainstem, and chunks this bad boy from point blank. But now they're all inside the lumber mill. They're all in the building, but they can hear the swarm outside. They can hear the lumbering of something massive coming toward them. But it is not the speaker. It is a Swarmac is coming toward it. They look out the doors. They see juvies. They see drones. Stuff that they might be able to handle. They might be able to hold off. But that Swarmac is coming at full force with something strapped to its back. Not sure if it's a gun or a saddle, but Oscar does not want to take the time to find that out. And Marcus Phoenix tells them, Plan B, which basically means get the hell out of Dodge. So Marcus, the twins, and Oscar zigzagging their way up the stairs, trying to keep a brisk pace. They would make it all the way to the top level of the lumber mill. And Oscar, in his desperation, in his hope that maybe they were zigzagging because of more traps maybe laid by Mackenzie, he was sadly mistaken, and he was sorrowful that he had to be mistaken. No, they had to zigzag because this place is basically falling apart, and every room they look into seems to have another piece of massive machinery just blocking their path, not allowing them to go in, not allowing them to use it as safe refuge. And so they finally come down toward this hallway, almost to the end of this top level, when they find a small supply room, ladies and gentlemen, filled with just boxes, and they can't see all the way to the back, but without any heavy machinery in it, this is the best place for them to be. They go inside. Oscar turns to the twins, tell them to find anything in these boxes that they might be able to use as a weapon. Marcus, Oscar, they begin barricading this door with massive supply crates, with a giant spool of a massive chain link. They pull it across the door to try to help add extra structural integrity to it so that it becomes even harder for people to get in. As the assault would begin, though, as they heard the first juvie just outside of their door, 2 more had passed in front of it. The third finally smelt them and stops. Oscar punches a hole through that wooden door with his gnasher, killing off the first juvie. And now a drone meandering toward the door, the next part of this assault, is heard. Marcus Phoenix actually goes to the door and follows along the wall with his lancer sighting up. He sees it, and he begins to follow it on his sights. He begins to pull the trigger. He's throwing holes, making that wall into Swiss cheese, but he can hear that he's making contact. The drone begins to scream wildly and in pain, being ripped to shreds by this lancer fire. But that bellow that it lets out warms every swarm in the entire vicinity. The search for the twins went from weaponry to escape, because suddenly everybody's going to come barreling down on these doors, and it's not going to hold for long. A few drones, a few juvies, ammo running dangerously low. Oscar takes his last shot with a Gnasher just before a baby pouncer flies into the room. Oscar rears back with his Gnasher, lets it go at the pouncer, and the quills come out and actually stab through the frame of the Gnasher, saving instantaneously Oscar from being impaled by one of these bad boys. Marcus, with one clip left and a perfect combat reload, wastes no time between shots and begins letting them ring out, knocking the pouncer on its side and hurting it enough for it to have to retreat itself. So now Oscar pulls his hunting knife from its sheath, rears it back to where the handle is forward in a perfect little slashing stance. He's ready to fight. A juvie flies at him. Above head, he takes one clean swipe over it, and he cuts that thing in half, guts it like a fish, ladies and gentlemen. Marcus lets out the last few shots of his Lancer, begins to rev the chainsaw bayonet up, and cuts one in twain as well, right in half like a good perfect sandwich in two triangular pieces, baby. But whatever hope they gathered from the possible escape route they're making by killing the swarm coming through the door and possibly wanting to run past them to get to another room to make it out safely is suddenly and quickly being dashed before their eyes. Because at the back wall, where there was no exit, one is being made by the massive Swarmach. That Swarmach rips the wall clean off the back of this supply room, and Chapter 10 ends there. We flash back toward the beach, back to Kate Diaz, who has decided not to allow either speaker to head off to help the others capture Marcus, Oscar, and the twins. Oh no, she takes this moment when they're kind of looking at one another, trying to figure out the hierarchy about who is in charge, to jump straight through the flames. She covers her face so she is not burnt or scarred, rolling onto the other side of it. Now both speakers are giving her their full attention. They come after her quite quickly, but she takes off, running down the riverbank, and as she gets further and further away from this lumberyard, she realizes that the terrain becomes more and more treacherous. It's harder to keep her footing. It's harder to keep her balance. But just like a horror movie, no matter how fast she continues to move, no matter what pace she keeps, it feels like those speakers are right behind her and she has no hope of escaping them. So what she does is try to throw them off. She puts her foot on the next log she comes in contact with, the next foothold she can grab, pushes off of it, and turns 180 like a reaction shot, baby. She's running backwards, and just in the nick of time, because the speaker with the massive spear had leapt at her and was coming down full force. That charged speaker was going to try to impale her with one fell swoop, but misses wildly. He's screaming in rage at the anger feeling that he was tricked. She tricked him with this 180-degree turn. She's running backwards. She sees the other one coming up behind her. She's going to try to make it happen again, but this speaker is too smart. It stops in its tracks. It is now waiting for her to turn back and run directly at him. But she is just as smart, if not smarter, than the average bear, ladies and gentlemen, because as he lifts that massive club above his head, waiting to smash the head of Kate Diaz, she ducks. She pulls that machete blade of her mother's out of its sheath, and she slashes across the abdomen of this speaker, cutting open the gummy-like substance, not where any crystals on his body are, in the abdomen, and he screams out. He yelps out in pain, and it gives her this sweet satisfaction that she's thwarted 3 attacks from these monsters that fill constantly her nightmares, that she feels like now she has a chance to get away from them. But she sees off in the distance an entire phalanx of drones, of juvies, of swarm are coming onto the lumber mill. They are guarding the outside, and she sees in the distance where that Swarmach is. She knows that it is the most dire of situations for Marcus, the twins, and Oscar. She has to figure something out. She has to be able to do something. But going into that phalanx would be suicide. Going up against that Swarmach single-handedly would be suicide, and she still has the 2 speakers to worry about at her back. She's running toward the bonfire that she had started. She's at the edge of the lakeshore. She's actually backed herself into a corner before she knows it, where she's been backtracking so much. She's standing knee-deep in the water. The speakers splashing their feet into the edge of the water. They have her cornered. She contemplates trying to swim for it. She contemplates whether she's going to attack them head on. She's not sure what she must do, but she turns to her right and sees fallen, discarded logs from the lumberyard, making almost a makeshift blanket across the lake, something that she might be able to run across one after the next if she is able to keep a sure footing. And this is her only chance. And when you're down to just one option, you got to take it. So she jumps onto these logs. She begins trying to keep pace. She's trying to keep balance. They roll, they bob, they weave underneath of her because they are just logs floating in a river, and she has no control, no sure footing. So she's just trying to make sure she does not fall in. The speakers, though, keeping up pace with her, one step at a time, staring at her, watching her, being the first wall that she must overcome if she is to try to help Marcus, the twins, and Oscar in the lumber mill. If she is to get to them, she must get through the speakers. She must get through that phalanx. She must get through that swarmac. But she hears it like a heartbeat getting louder, pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding off in the distance. She's not sure what it is, but that thump, the thump getting louder. It's in her chest. It's all around her. Is it adrenaline? Is it something she can hold on to? Is it something that will give her the boost that she needs to win this fight, to win this battle? But it is not. It is something extra outside of her. It is something coming for help. It is the cavalry itself, ladies and gentlemen. She assumes it is just a condor with more of those DBs that are horrible at fighting swarm. She kicks the logs away from her. She's going to throw herself into the water to allow for this condor to pass overhead and drop its pods. But she turns. It's not a condor. Just before her ears can hit this water, it's a king raven, ladies and gentlemen. It is the vessel that carries our beloved heroes, and before her ears plummet under the water and she doesn't hear it, she hears that oh so iconic woo of the coal train baby. They are coming to join the fray. And that is how chapter 11 closes out. And that's where we end today's video. I thank each and every one of you for joining me. I can't wait to do the second half of, or the third part technically, but the second half of this video and give it all to you so that you can see how this story wraps up. We're at a pivotal point. We're at the climax, ladies and gentlemen. Marcus, Oscar, the twins caught in the lumber mill, the swarmac breathing down their necks, Kate falling into this lake water in the moonlight with speakers and a phalanx between her and the lumber mill, but the cavalry has arrived on horseback, except it's a king raven. Cole, Dell, JD, Baird, and Sam, some of the baddest mofos to hit the planet Sarah, are coming to save the day. Don't miss it. We'll be back tomorrow.